One murder every hour. That was the reality that El Salvador was facing in 2015, when observers dubbed it the homicide capital of the world. That year, the nation's murder rate was 103 per 100,000 people, which for comparison was almost 20 times higher than America's murder rate during that same period. While El Salvador's homicide rate would reduce in the following years, dropping by half to 51 in 2018, this was still, obviously, pretty damn high. Indeed, it's as high as Ecuador's is today amidst their internal armed conflict. Enter Nayib Bukele, the charismatic former marketing executive who won the 2019 Salvadorian presidential elections by portraying himself as a political outsider and promising to end two of the country's most endemic challenges: runaway corruption and rampant gang violence. After his election, Bukele implemented the Territorial Control Plan, a multi-phase strategy aimed at breaking the gangs by disrupting their financing, recruiting, and economic networks. The plan, and a subsequent declaration of a state of emergency in 2022, saw a dramatic increase in police powers, allowing them to detain suspects without charges for up to 15 days, and led to the flooding of gang-controlled areas with security personnel, including military officers. While contentious for its human rights abuses, the plan has undoubtedly been successful. By 2022, the number of homicides had dropped by more than 97.7%, and Bukele was receiving plaudits from other nations in the region suffering their own crime waves. But fast forward to the present day, and regional observers are starting to ring alarm bells, warning that El Salvador is sitting on not one, but multiple ticking time bombs that are poised to explode at any moment. And all of them are linked to President Bukele's war on gangs. A deal with the gangs. In early May of this year, El Faro, a digital outlet that covers Central America, published the first in a series of video interviews with Salvadorian gang members who alleged that Bukele's government had made secret pacts with the gangs. Over the course of 3 episodes, the leaders of one of El Salvador's biggest gangs, the Barrio 18 Revolucionarios, painted a picture of a president who had been in bed with all of the nation's armed groups since the earliest days of his political career. They alleged that in 2014, Bukele's party had paid them $250,000 to help him get elected mayor of the capital, a position that helped cement Bukele's national profile on the way to his 2019 presidential election win. They further alleged that the pact continued once he became president and included loopholes that allowed gang members to continue extorting and murdering without fear of punishment. Further investigations by the independent outlet ProPublica revealed that Washington suspected that Bukele and members of his inner circle were diverting money meant for aid to the gangs as part of an alleged deal to provide them with money and power in exchange for votes and reduced homicide rates. According to the outlet, agents drew up a request to review U.S. bank accounts held by Salvadorian political figures, including Bukele, to look for evidence of money laundering related to the suspected diversion of U.S. funds. After the investigation, one of the agents wrote, and we'll quote them here, "Information obtained through investigation has revealed that the individuals contained within this submission are heavily engaged with MS-13 and are laundering funds from illicit business where MS-13 are involved. The individuals are also believed to have been funding MS-13 to support political campaigns, and MS-13 have received political funds." Even the Salvadoran government has found evidence of deals between Bukele's government and the gangs. Attorney General Raul Malara found that in 2020, Bukele's administration held negotiations in maximum security prisons with El Salvador's 3 main gangs: MS-13, Barrio 18 Revolucionarios, and Barrio 18 Suranos. In exchange for their commitment to holding the national homicide rate at a historic low, the gangs demanded, among other things, improved prison conditions and increased employment opportunities for their members outside of prison. However, before the Attorney General could complete his investigations or make any arrests, he was ousted by the new parliament, where Bukele's government held a supermajority in what many saw as an attempt to derail the investigation and hide the fact that Bukele had made a deal with the gangs. And that brings us to the first of our ticking time bombs. How long will the deal between Bukele's government and the gangs last, and what happens when, not if, it collapses? We say when, not because we're pessimists who think that the government's attempt to bring peace to El Salvador is doomed to end in failure. In fact, it's quite the opposite. There are few things we want more than for El Salvador to find lasting peace. We say when because deals between governments and gangs invariably collapse because no matter how much they pretend otherwise, the gangs will always have their own interests, which are often opposed to what the government wants. El Salvador is already intimately familiar with this. In our introduction, we mentioned the 2015 murder rate, which was a staggering 103 per 100,000 people. We chose to highlight it because it came on the heels of a truce between the government and the gangs that lasted from 2012 to 2014. According to an anonymous police chief who spoke to the local outlet La Prensa Grafica, the gangs were using the truce as an opportunity to stockpile weapons and diversify their revenue streams in an attempt to deepen their control over communities. This means that the truce was less an opportunity for peace and more of a spring break for heavily armed criminals, where they get to rest and restock before committing one of the most gruesome series of murders the country had ever seen. Bukele's government also experienced something similar in 2022. Between the 25th and the 27th of March of that year, MS-13 carried out a spate of killings that left 87 people dead. A spokesperson for the group told El Faro that the killings happened because the government hadn't honored its promises. Quoting him here, the government, were doing things that they should not have done. That's why there were 80 deaths on those days. They didn't keep their word. They made arrests that they shouldn't have. They said, meet us at such and such place to talk, and instead of talking, they made arrests. MS-13 saw the killings as a way to pressure the government to release those it had arrested. The rest of us, it gives us an idea of just how much bloodshed the country could witness if the deal breaks, although it's important to note here that the situation today is much different from the situation back in 2014. Back then, the gang structures remained mostly intact, and the lower-ranking members weren't tossed in jail en masse. President Bukele's government has done everything in its power to avoid a repeat of what happened before. Following the March massacre, the administration instituted a state of emergency, which has so far led to the arrest of 89,000 people. According to the London-based Institute for Crime and Justice Policy Research, this means that El Salvador has one of the world's highest incarceration rates, 1,659 prisoners for every 100,000 inhabitants, nearly triple the rate of the United States, and more than 10 times the global average. And all of this takes us nicely to the second of our ticking time bombs. Prison population. If you were to ask the Salvadoran government, nearly every one of the 89,000 people who have been arrested are either confirmed gang members, their associates, or people strongly suspected of being in a gang. However, according to various organizations, including Human Rights Watch, a large number of the incarcerated were only arrested because police were under pressure to meet daily arrest quotas and often fabricated evidence to guarantee an arrest. The government itself has quietly acknowledged this problem. Over the years, the authorities have released over 8,000 people after holding them for months without charges, effectively admitting that innocent people had been swept up in the dragnet. One officer told Human Rights Watch, and we'll quote them here, "They imposed arrest quotas on us. Each patrol had to detain 3 to 4 people per shift. If not, we couldn't return to base. Just to get a break, police officers arrest whoever. Our colleagues do it because they're forced to. Our 3-day leave would be taken away as punishment. We had identified the areas where the gangs were located, and we began to carry out illegal arrests." Setting aside the Soviet-style problem of arrest quotas for a moment, this means that there are broadly 2 groups of people within El Salvador's prisons. On the one hand, we have hardened gang members and their associates, and on the other hand, we have innocent people, among them more than 3,000 children who have been arrested to fill quotas. Now let's start with the second group, because unbeknownst to the president, by imposing arrest quotas and forcing the police to arrest innocent people, he may have handed the gangs a really rather important recruiting tool. The conditions facing those arrested on falsified charges are, in a word, brutal. The cells are overcrowded, with the director of one prison telling the BBC that they put 20 people in a cell meant to hold 10. There's no ventilation, there's no water to cool off, guards routinely torture prisoners, and the sick only receive treatment when they are on death's door. This is the reality that a lot of people in El Salvador's prisons are dealing with right now, and those conditions, more often than not, create the kind of conditions that push people into the hands of the gangs. While some may seek gang affiliation for protection or because they feel the system has abandoned them, the more prevalent pattern, documented extensively in similar contexts like Ecuador, involves aggressive recruitment by gangs who use violence and intimidation to coerce new members, threatening harm to those who resist. Whether seeking protection, retribution, or being forcibly recruited, the end result is the same. Prisoners become entangled in gang networks. This phenomenon is not limited to the Americas. During the Troubles in Northern Ireland, the UK implemented a policy of internment, arresting hundreds of people from Catholic and nationalist backgrounds. Like in El Salvador, the intelligence used in making the arrests was often faulty and led to the arrest of people who had no association with the Irish Republican Army or IRA. Eleanor Lee Williams, in a paper for the Critical Studies on Terrorism journal, wrote, and we'll quote her here, "Internment exacerbated the conflict by fueling the PIRA with recruits, shifted the conflict from being urban-based to a nationwide conflict." And there's a real chance that the same thing could be happening in El Salvador. By putting innocent people in a position where joining a gang gives them their best hope of survival, the Salvadoran government may have created a pipeline that funnels new recruits directly into the gang's hands. And that brings us to another uncomfortable truth that Bukele's government seems rather unwilling to face. You cannot keep more than 1% of your population in prison indefinitely because if nothing else, it's incredibly expensive. According to Joseph Addington, an associate editor at The American Conservative, the government spends more than $200 million to maintain its prisons, over 3% of the national budget. This is a staggering sum for a country where, according to the World Bank, poverty levels increased from 26.8% in 2019 to 30.3% in 2023. And while the Trump administration recently paid $6 million for El Salvador to host deported migrants, that is a drop in the bucket compared to how much Bukele's government is spending on the prisons. As Christine Wade, an El Salvador expert at Washington College in Maryland, told Time magazine, Bukele has built a house of cards because it's an incredibly expensive security policy. It's not financially sustainable. The government recently passed a measure allowing it to detain people for up to 5 years without trial. Another expensive endeavor, but again, 5 years isn't forever. At some point, if those people are not convicted in the upcoming mass trials and handed significant prison sentences, they will be released to go back to their homes. But this time, they're going to be radicalized. They're going to have access to criminal networks, and they'll be nursing a grudge against the government. Now, if the innocent people swept up in Bukele's dragnet can be radicalized by their experience in prison, imagine what could happen to the actual gang members. These are people who entered prison with violent ideologies and are now spending years in conditions designed to humiliate them. And it has made them angry. Officials and former prisoners told the Associated Press that gang members simmer with a sort of vengeful rage. A social worker who spoke to the AP on the condition of anonymity called it, you guessed it, a ticking time bomb. Now, that's not to say that this bomb is ever going to explode. It could be that the Salvadoran government generates enough growth due to the near elimination of crime that it can keep paying for this mass detention indefinitely. We're definitely not saying that the only outcome here is some sort of catastrophe. What we are saying is that there are hard trade-offs that the government doesn't seem to be acknowledging. And while there is a chance everything will just turn out fine, there's also a chance that trouble is simply being stored up for down the line. Nor is that trouble just confined to El Salvador. Should everything go south, the country's neighbors could suffer too. Exporting a crisis. Our final time bomb isn't just limited to El Salvador, but has the potential to affect the whole of Central America. According to the El Faro interviews we referenced in a previous chapter, 2 gang members alleged that the Bukele government had helped them escape the country to avoid prosecutions. Further reports from the same outlet and others such as Insight Crime indicate that they aren't the only ones. These gang leaders are fleeing to countries such as Honduras, Mexico, and Guatemala, where they have already established networks and are presumably using their experience and connections to expand operations. Or they could simply be lying low, as they have done in the past, as they wait for the situation in El Salvador to once again become favorable to them. Regardless of what they are doing, the fact that they are in foreign countries represents a regionalization of El Salvador's gang problem. Rather than solving the issue, Bukele may have simply exported it to neighboring countries that lack the infrastructure, political will, or resources to deal with an influx of experienced gang operatives. For nations dealing with their own crime waves, it's one of the worst-case scenarios. And then there are the countries, such as Ecuador, that have tried to copy Bukele's model. Unfortunately, what these nations don't know is that by copying the model, without the key elements of what made it work in El Salvador, including the secret deals with the gangs and a willingness to suspend all constitutional norms, they are opening themselves up to the same risks that El Salvador is currently facing. Additionally, there's the fact that the local Ecuadorian gangs are a lot more sophisticated than their Salvadorian counterparts. They are funded and armed by Mexico's cartels, Italian mafias, and Balkan crime groups. As might be expected, the Ecuadorian government is having a harder time breaking these gangs than El Salvador ever did. Ecuador's attempts at replicating the Bukele model has become more of a cautionary tale than a success story. While in 2024 the country saw a 16.5% drop in the homicide rate, 2025 saw a catastrophic reversal. Between the 1st and the 25th of January, the police recorded 658 murders, which was a 56% increase compared to the same period in 2024. This means that on average, one person was killed every hour, the same kind of figures that El Salvador was seeing before the implementation of Bukele's plan. The prison system, which the government had tried to bring under control through militarization, has become as deadly as it was before the declaration of an internal armed conflict. In the past few months, Ecuador has experienced several prison riots that have left dozens dead and injured. What is happening in Ecuador right now offers a glimpse of what could happen in El Salvador should any of the time bombs that we listed go off. While it seems peaceful now, El Salvador could yet witness a return to Ecuadorian levels of violence. And now look, this isn't guaranteed to happen. As we mentioned before, Bukele's administration has done a lot to break the gang's hold on the country. After all, there's only so much beating a criminal organization could take before it's rendered completely useless. The important point, though, is that the possibility still remains for a cascading failure that drags down not just El Salvador, but the entire region. And rather than pretend everything will be hunky-dory forever, the Bukele government should, at the very least, be preparing for this possibility. Whether they will or not, that's another matter entirely. Thank you for watching.